Orange is the New Black, My Year in a Women's Prison, by Piper Kerman. Narrated by Cassandra Campbell. Copyright 2010 by Piper Kerman. This unabridged audiobook is recorded by arrangement with Spiegel and Grau, an imprint of the Random House Publishing Group, a division of Random House Incorporated, and was produced in the year 2012 by Tantor Media Incorporated, which holds the copyright thereto. Ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. From Anthem by Leonard Cohen. Author's note. This book is a memoir and is drawn from my own experience. All of the names, and in some cases distinguishing characteristics, of the people who lived and worked inside of the prisons where I was held have been changed to afford them their privacy. The exceptions are Sister Ardith Platy and Alice Gerard, who kindly granted me permission to use their real names. Chapter 1. Are you going to go my way? International baggage claim in the Brussels airport was large and airy, with multiple carousels circling endlessly. I scurried from one to another, desperately trying to find my black suitcase. Because it was stuffed with drug money, I was more concerned than one might normally be about lost luggage. I was 24 in 1993, and probably looked like just another anxious young professional woman. My Doc Martens had been jettisoned in favor of beautiful handmade black suede heels. I wore black silk pants and a beige jacket, a typical jeune fille, not a bit counterculture, unless you spotted the tattoo on my neck. I had done exactly as I had been instructed, checking my bag in Chicago through Paris, where I had to switch planes to take a short flight to Brussels. When I arrived in Belgium, I looked for my black rollie at the baggage claim. It was nowhere to be seen. Fighting a rushing tide of panic, I asked in my mangled high school French what had become of my suitcase. "Bags don't make it onto the right flight sometimes," said the big lug working in baggage handling. "Wait for the next shuttle from Paris. It's probably on that plane." Had my bag been detected? I knew that carrying more than $10,000 undeclared was illegal, let alone carrying it for a West African drug lord. Were the authorities closing in on me? Maybe I should try to get through customs and run, or perhaps the bag really was just delayed, and I would be abandoning a large sum of money that belonged to someone who could probably have me killed with a simple phone call. I decided that the latter choice was slightly more terrifying. So I waited. The next flight from Paris finally arrived. I sidled over to my new friend in baggage handling, who was sorting things out. It's hard to flirt when you're frightened. I spotted the suitcase. "Mon bag!" I exclaimed in ecstasy, seizing the to-me. I thanked him effusively, waving with giddy affection as I sailed through one of the unmanned doors into the terminal, where I spotted my friend Billy waiting for me. I had inadvertently skipped customs. "I was worried. What happened?" Billy asked. "Get me into a cab," I hissed. I didn't breathe until we had pulled away from the airport and were halfway across Brussels. My graduation processional at Smith College the year before was on a perfect New England spring day. In the sun-dappled quad, bagpipes whined, and Texas Governor Ann Richards exhorted my classmates and me to get out there and show the world what kind of women we were. My family was proud and beaming as I took my degree. My freshly separated parents were on their best behavior. My stately Southern grandparents pleased to see their oldest grandchild wearing a mortar board and surrounded by wasps and ivy. My little brother bored out of his mind. My more organized and goal-oriented classmates set off for their graduate school programs or entry-level jobs at nonprofits, or they moved back home, not uncommon during the depths of the first Bush recession. I, on the other hand, stayed on in Northampton, Massachusetts. I had majored in theater, much to the skepticism of my father and grandfather. I came from a family that prized education. We were a clan of doctors and lawyers and teachers, with the odd nurse, poet, or judge thrown into the mix. After 4 years of study, I still felt like a dilettante, underqualified and unmotivated for a life in the theater, but neither did I have an alternate plan for academic studies, a meaningful career, or the great default, law school. I wasn't lazy. I had always worked hard through my college jobs in restaurants, bars, and nightclubs, winning the affection of my bosses and co-workers via sweat, humor, and a willingness to work doubles. Those jobs and those people were more my speed than many of the people I had met at college. I was glad that I had chosen Smith, a college full of smart and dynamic women. But I was finished with what was required of me by birth and background. I had chafed within the safe confines of Smith, graduating by a narrow margin, and I longed to experience, experiment, investigate. It was time for me to live my own life. I was a well-educated young lady from Boston with a thirst for bohemian counterculture and no clear plan. But I had no idea what to do with all my pent-up longing for adventure, or how to make my eagerness to take risks productive. No scientific or analytical bent was evident in my thinking. What I valued was artistry and effort and emotion. I got an apartment with a fellow theater grad and her nutty artist girlfriend, and a job waiting tables at a microbrewery. I bonded with fellow waitrons, bartenders, and musicians, all equally nubile and constantly clad in black. We worked, we threw parties, we went skinny dipping or sledding, we fucked, sometimes we fell in love. We got tattoos. I enjoyed everything Northampton and the surrounding Pioneer Valley had to offer. I ran for miles and miles on country lanes, learned how to carry a dozen pints of beer up steep stairs, indulged in numerous romantic peccadillos with appetizing girls and boys, and journeyed to Provincetown for midweek beach excursions on my days off throughout the summer and fall. When winter set in, I began to grow uneasy. My friends from school told me about their jobs and their lives in New York, Washington, and San Francisco, and I wondered what the hell I was doing. I knew I wasn't going back to Boston. I loved my family, but the fallout of my parents' divorce was something I wanted to avoid completely. In retrospect, a Eurorail ticket or volunteering in Bangladesh would have been brilliant choices, but I stayed stuck in the valley. Among our loose social circle was a clique of impossibly stylish and cool lesbians in their mid-30s. These worldly and sophisticated older women made me feel uncharacteristically shy, but when several of them moved in next door to my apartment, we became friends. Among them was a raspy-voiced Midwesterner named Nora Jansen, who had a mop of curly sandy brown hair. Nora was short and looked a bit like a French bulldog, or maybe a white Eartha Kitt. Everything about her was droll. Her drawling, wisecracking, husky voice, the way she cocked her head to look at you with bright brown eyes from under her mop, even the way she held her ever-present cigarette, wrist flexed and ready for gesture. She had a playful, watchful way of drawing a person out, and when she paid you attention, it felt as if she were about to let you in on a private joke. Nora was the only one of that group of older women who paid any attention to me. It wasn't exactly love at first sight, but in Northampton, to a 22-year-old looking for adventure, she was a figure of intrigue. And then, in the fall of 1992, she was gone. She reappeared after Christmas. Now she rented a big apartment of her own, furnished with brand-new arts and crafts-style furniture and a killer stereo. Everyone else I knew was sitting on thrift store couches with their roommates, while she was throwing money around in a way that got attention. Nora asked me out for a drink, just the two of us, which was a first. Was it a date? Perhaps it was, because she took me to the bar of the Hotel Northampton, the closest local approximation to a swank hotel lounge, painted pale green with white trellis work everywhere. I nervously ordered a margarita with salt, at which Nora arched a brow. "Sort of chilly for a marg?" she commented as she asked for a scotch. It was true. The January winds were making western Massachusetts uninviting. I should have ordered something dark in a smaller glass. My frosty margarita now seemed ridiculously juvenile. "What's that?" she asked, indicating the little metal box I had placed on the table. The box was yellow and green and had originally held sour lemon pastilles. Napoleon gazed westward from its lid, identifiable by his cocked hat and gold epaulettes. The box had served as a wallet for a woman I'd known at Smith, an upper-class woman who was the coolest person I had ever met. She had gone to art school, lived off campus, was wry and curious and kind and super hip, and one day when I had admired the box, she gave it to me. It was the perfect size for a pack of cigarettes, a license, and a 20. When I tried to pull money out of my treasured tin wallet to pay for the round, Nora waved it away. Where had she been for so many months? I asked, and Nora gave me an appraising once-over. She calmly explained to me that she had been brought into a drug-smuggling enterprise by a friend of her sister, who was connected, and that she had gone to Europe and been formally trained in the ways of the underworld by an American art dealer who was also connected. She had smuggled drugs into this country and been paid handsomely for her work. I was completely floored. Why was Nora telling me this? What if I went to the police? I ordered another drink, half certain that Nora was making the entire thing up, and that this was the most harebrained seduction attempt ever. I had met Nora's younger sister once before, when she came to visit. She went by the name of Hester and was into the occult, and would leave a trail of charms and feathered trinkets made of chicken bones. I thought she was just a Wiccan heterosexual version of her sister, but apparently she was the lover of a West African drug kingpin. Nora described how she had traveled with Hester to Benin to meet the kingpin, who went by the name of Alaji and bore a striking resemblance to MC Hammer. She had stayed as a guest at his compound, witnessed and been subject to witch doctor ministrations, and was now considered his sister-in-law. It all sounded dark, awful, scary, wild, and exciting beyond belief. I couldn't believe that she, the keeper of so many terrifying and tantalizing secrets, was taking me into her confidence. It was as if by revealing her secrets to me, Nora had bound me to her, and a secretive courtship began. No one would call Nora a classic beauty, but she had wit and charm in excess, and was a master at the art of seeming effortlessness. And, as has always been true, I respond to people who come after me with clear determination. In her seduction of me, she was both persistent and patient. Over the months that followed, we grew much closer, and I learned that a number of local guys I knew were secretly working for her, which proved reassuring to me. I was entranced by the illicit adventure Nora represented. When she was in Europe or Southeast Asia for a long period of time, I all but moved into her house, caring for her beloved black cats, Edith and Dum-Dum. She would call at odd hours of the night from the other side of the globe to see how the kitties were, and the phone line would click and hiss with the distance. I kept all this quiet, even as I was dodging questions from my already curious friends. Since business was conducted out of town, the reality of the drugs felt like a complete abstraction to me. I didn't know anyone who used heroin, and the suffering of addiction was not something I thought about. One day in the spring, Nora returned home with a brand-new white Miata convertible and a suitcase full of money. She dumped the cash on the bed and rolled around in it, naked and giggling. It was her biggest payout yet. Soon, I was zipping around in that Miata, with Lenny Kravitz on the tape deck demanding to know, "Are you going to go my way?" Despite, or perhaps because of the bizarre romantic situation with Nora, I knew I needed to get out of Northampton and do something. My friend Lisa B. and I had been saving our tips and decided we would quit our jobs at the brewery and take off for San Francisco at the end of the summer. Lisa knew nothing about Nora's secret activities. When I told Nora, she replied that she would love to have an apartment in San Francisco and suggested that we fly out there and house hunt. I was shocked that she felt so strongly about me. Just weeks before I was to leave Northampton, Nora learned that she had to return to Indonesia. "Why don't you come with me? Keep me company," she suggested. "You don't have to do anything. Just hang out." I had never been out of the United States. Although I was supposed to begin my new life in California, the prospect was irresistible. I wanted an adventure, and Nora had one on offer. Nothing bad had ever happened to the guys from Northampton who had gone with her to exotic places as errand boys. In fact, they returned with high-flying stories that only a select group could even hear. I rationalized that there was no harm in keeping Nora company. She gave me money to purchase a ticket from San Francisco to Paris, and said there would be a ticket to Bali waiting for me at the Garuda air counter at Charles de Gaulle. It was that simple. Nora's cover for her illegal activities was that she and her partner in crime, a goateed guy named Jack, were starting an art and literary magazine. Questionable, but it lent itself to vagueness. When I explained to my friends and family that I was moving to San Francisco and would be working and traveling for the magazine, they were uniformly surprised and suspicious of my new job. But I rebuffed their questions, adopting the air of a woman of mystery. As I drove out of Northampton, headed west with my buddy Lisa, I felt as if I were finally embarking on my life. I felt ready for anything. Lisa and I drove nonstop from Massachusetts to the Montana border, taking turns sleeping and driving. In the middle of the night, we pulled into a rest stop to sleep, where we awoke to see the incredible golden eastern Montana dawn. I could not remember ever being so happy. After lingering in Big Sky country, we sped through Wyoming and Nevada until finally we sailed over the Bay Bridge into San Francisco. I had a plane to catch. What would I need for my journey to Indonesia? I had no idea. I packed one small L.L. Bean duffel bag with a pair of black silk pants, a tank dress, blue jean cutoffs, 3 T-shirts, a red silk shirt, a black mini skirt, my running gear, and a pair of black cowboy boots. I was so excited I forgot to pack a bathing suit. Upon arrival in Paris, I went straight to the Garuda counter to claim my ticket to Bali. They had never heard of me. Freaked out, I sat down at an airport restaurant, ordered a coffee, and tried to decide what to do. The days of cell phones and email were still in the future, and I had no idea how to reach Nora. I assumed something must have gotten lost in translation. Finally, I got up and went to the newsstand, bought a Paris guidebook, and picked out a cheap hotel that was centrally located in the 6th arrondissement. My one credit card had a very low limit. From my little room, I could see the rooftops of Paris. I called Jack, Nora's old friend and now business partner in the States. Snide and superior and obsessed with prostitutes, Jack was not one of my favorite people. "I'm stranded in Paris. Nothing Nora told me is right. What should I do?" I asked him. Jack was annoyed, but decided he could not leave me to my own devices. "Go find a Western Union. Tomorrow I'll wire you money for a ticket." The wire didn't come for several days, but I didn't mind. I wandered Paris in a haze of excitement, taking everything in. Alongside most French women, I looked like a teenager, so to counter this, I bought a pair of spidery and beautiful black crochet stockings to go with my Doc Martens and miniskirt. I didn't care if I ever left Paris. I was in heaven, all alone. When I got off the smoky 13-hour flight from Paris to Bali, I was surprised to find my former brewery co-worker Billy waiting for me, towering above the Indonesians with a big grin on his freckled face. Billy could have passed for my brother, strawberry blonde with bright blue eyes. "Nora's waiting at the resort. You're going to love it here," he said. Reunited with Nora in our luxurious room, I felt shy with her in this unfamiliar setting, but she acted as if this were all perfectly normal. Bali was a bacchanalia. Days and nights of sunbathing, drinking, and dancing until all hours with Nora's crew of gay boys, any pretty locals who wanted to help us spend money, and young Euros and Aussies we met in the clubs at Kuta Beach. I went to the street market to buy a bikini and sarong, bartered for carved masks and silver jewelry, and walked the back roads of Nusa Dua, talking to the friendly locals. Expeditions to temples, parasailing, and scuba diving offered other diversions, and the Balinese scuba instructors loved the long-finned, jeweled, and elegant bluefish that had been tattooed on my neck back in New England, and eagerly showed me their own tattoos. But the festivities were punctuated by tense phone calls between Nora and Alaji, or Nora and Jack. The way their business worked was simple. From West Africa, Alaji would make it known to select people in the States that he had contracts for units of drugs, usually custom-built suitcases with heroin sewn into the linings available. They could turn up at any number of places in the world. People like Nora and Jack, essentially subcontractors, would arrange to transport the suitcases into the States, where they were handed off to an anonymous pickup. It was up to them to figure out how to manage the transport, recruiting couriers, training them on how to get through customs undetected, paying for their vacations and their fees. Nora and Jack were not the only people with whom Alaji worked. In fact, Nora was now competing with Jonathan Bibby, the art dealer who had originally trained her for Alaji's business. The tension I observed in Nora derived from how many contracts were available, whether she and Jack could fulfill them, and whether the units of drugs would actually arrive as scheduled, all factors that seemed to change at a moment's notice. The job required lots of flexibility and lots of cash. When cash ran low, I would be sent off to retrieve money wires from Alaji at various banks, a crime itself, although I did not realize it. Then I was sent on one such errand in Jakarta. One of the intended drug couriers asked to come along for the ride. He was a young gay guy from Chicago who was heavily into goth but cleaned up well and looked the part of the perfect prepster. He was bored by the plush hotel. During the long, hot ride across the sprawling city, we were transfixed by the gridlock, the cages of barking puppies for sale at roadside, and the human strata that the Southeast Asian metropolis offers. At a traffic light, a beggar lay in the street asking for alms. His skin was almost blackened by the sun, and he had no legs. I started to roll down my window to give him some of the hundreds of thousands of rupiah that I had with me. My companion gasped and shrank back in his seat. "Don't!" he shouted. I looked at him, disgusted and perplexed. Our taxi driver took the money from me and handed it out his window to the beggar. We rode on in silence. We had tons of time to kill. We blew off steam in Bali beach clubs, Jakarta military pool halls, and nightclubs like Tanamur that were borderline brothels. Nora and I shopped, got facials, or journeyed to other parts of Indonesia. Just the two of us. Girl time. We didn't always get along. During a trip to Krakatoa, we hired a guide to lead us on a hike in the mountains, which were covered by dense, humid jungle growth. It was hot, sweaty going. We stopped to eat lunch by a beautiful river pool at the top of a towering waterfall. After a skinny dip, Nora dared me, Double Dog dared me to be precise, to jump off the falls, which were at least 35 feet high. "Have you seen people jump?" I asked our guide. "Oh, yes, miss," he said, smiling. "Have you ever jumped?" "Oh, no, miss," he said, still smiling. Still, a dare was a dare. Naked, I began to crawl down the rock that seemed like the most logical jumping place. The falls roared. I saw the churning, opaque green water far below. I was terrified, and this suddenly seemed like a bad idea. But the rock was slippery, and as I tried in vain to edge back like a crab, I realized that I was going to have to jump. There was no other way. I gathered all of my physical strength and flung myself off the rock and into the air, shrieking as I plunged deep into the green gorge below. I burst the surface, laughing and exhilarated. Minutes later, Nora came howling down the falls after me. When she popped up, she gasped, "You are crazy!" "You mean you wouldn't have gone if I had been too scared to jump?" I asked, surprised. "No fucking way," she replied. Right then and there, I should have understood that Nora was not to be trusted. Indonesia offered what seemed like a limitless range of experience, but there was a murky, threatening edge to it. I'd never seen such stark poverty as what was on display in Jakarta, or such naked capitalism at work in the enormous factories and the Texas drawls coming from across the hotel lobby where the oil company executives were drinking. You could spend a lovely hour chatting at the bar with a grandfatherly Brit about the charms of San Francisco and his prize greyhounds back in the UK. But when you took his business card on the way out, he would explain casually that he was an arms dealer. When I rode the elevator to the top of the Jakarta Grand Hyatt at dusk, stepped into the lush garden there, and began to run laps on the track that circuited the roof, I could hear the Muslim call to prayer echoing from mosque to mosque throughout the entire city. After many weeks, I was both sad and relieved to say goodbye to Indonesia and head back to the West. I was homesick. For 4 months of my life, I traveled constantly with Nora, occasionally touching down in the States for a few days. We lived a life of relentless tension, yet it was also crushingly boring. I had little to do, other than keep Nora company while she dealt with her mules. I would roam the streets of strange cities all alone. I felt disconnected from the world even as I was seeing it, a person without purpose or place. This was not the adventure I craved. I was lying to my family about every aspect of my life and growing sick and tired of my adopted drug family. During a brief stay in the States to visit with my real and very suspicious family, I received a call from Nora, who said that she needed me to meet her in Chicago. O'Hare Airport was known as a safe airport, whatever that meant, and it was where the drugs were flown. I met her at the Congress Hotel on Michigan Avenue. What a dump, I thought. I was used to the Mandarin Oriental. Nora explained tersely that she needed me to fly out the next day, carrying cash to be dropped off in Brussels. She had to do this for a lodgie, and I had to do it for her. She never asked anything of me, but she was asking now. Deep down, I felt that I had signed up for this situation and could not say no. I was scared, and I agreed to do it. In Europe, things took a darker turn. Nora's business was getting harder for her to maintain, and she was taking reckless chances with couriers, and that was a very scary thing. Her partner Jack joined us in Belgium, and things went downhill rapidly. I thought he was greedy, lecherous, and dangerous, and I could see that Nora trusted him far more than she cared for me. I was scared and miserable, retreating into almost constant silence as we all moved from Belgium to Switzerland. I moped around Zurich alone, while Nora and Jack schemed. I saw the piano 3 times in a row, gratefully transported to another place and time as I cried throughout the movie. When Nora informed me in no uncertain terms that she wanted me to carry drugs, I knew that I was no longer valuable to her unless I could make her money. Obediently, I lost my passport and was issued a new one. She costumed me in glasses, pearls, and a pair of ugly loafers. With makeup, she tried in vain to cover up the fish tattooed on my neck. I was told to get a conservative haircut. Caught in a cold Saturday afternoon rainstorm trying to find a hairdresser who would transform my overgrown blonde tresses into something presentable, I staggered dripping into a tiny salon, the 5th I had tried. I had been met with an Arctic Swiss reception in the previous 4, but now a soft, familiar accent asked, "Y'all need some help?" I almost cried when I saw the fellow who was asking, a sweet young Southerner named Fenwick, who looked like Terence Trent D'Arby. He took my wet coat, sat me down in his chair, and gave me hot tea and a haircut. He was curious but gentle when I balked at explaining myself or my presence in his salon. He talked about New Orleans, music, and Zurich. "It's a great city, but we have a terrible heroin problem here. You see people just lying in the streets, out of it." I felt ashamed. I wanted to go home. I thanked Fenwick profusely as I left his salon, the only friend I had made in months. At any time, with one phone call, my family would have helped rescue me from this mess of my own making, yet I never placed that call. I thought I had to tough it out on my own. I alone had signed up for this misadventure, and I alone would navigate it to some conclusion, although I was now petrified that it might be a very dismal end. Nora and Alaji developed an elaborate and risky scheme to switch suitcases inside the Zurich airport, but mercifully, the drugs she wanted me to carry never showed up, and I narrowly avoided becoming a drug courier. It seemed like it was only a matter of time before disaster would strike, and I was in way over my head. I knew I had to escape. When we got back to the States, I took the first flight to California I could get. From the safety of the West Coast, I broke all ties with Nora and put my criminal life behind me. Chapter 2. It all changed in an instant. San Francisco was a welcome refuge. I might be a freak, but at least I was among many. I found a place on the Lower Haight with my old friend Alfie, a brewery co-worker from back east who was now living in San Francisco. I was shell-shocked and felt like a smoking chunk of Skylab that had crashed through the atmosphere back to Earth. When Alfie wasn't around, I would sit on the floor of our apartment and ponder what I had done, astonished by how far afield I had wandered and how willing I had been to abandon myself on the journey. I vowed that I would never relinquish my sense of self again to anything or anyone. After spending months in the underworld, it took a while to get used to a normal life. I had been living on room service, exoticism, and anxiety for a long time. But I had several great friends from college now in the Bay Area who took me under their wing, pulling me into a world of work, barbecues, softball games, and other wholesome rituals. I quit smoking. I was terrified all the time about money and immediately got 2 jobs. I rose early in the morning to get to job 1 in the Castro, opening Josie's Juice Joint and Cabaret at 7 a.m., and I got home late at night after hostessing at a swank Italian restaurant across town in Pacific Heights. Finally, I got a real job at a TV production company that specialized in infomercials. The job required coaxing passers-by onto bizarre exercise equipment in public places, tending to the needs of C-list celebrities on set, and waxing facial hair off perfect strangers. I flew all over the country, filming people who wanted to be less fat, less poor, less wrinkled, less lonely, or less hairy. I found that I could talk to just about anyone, whether it was Bruce Jenner or a mom with a mustache, and find some common ground with them quickly. I wanted to be less poor, lonely, and hairy, too. I worked my way up from Gal Friday to a real producer, working on pre-production, filming, and editing for broadcast. I loved my job, much to the amusement of my friends, who would tease me about the latest late-night life-changing widget, scheme, or cream. I dated, but still felt pretty crispy and gun-shy after the flame-out with Nora. I was fine being serially single, with the occasional crazy romance thrown in to distract me from work. I never talked about my involvement with Nora to new friends, and the number of people who knew my secret remained very small. As time passed, I gradually relaxed inside my head. I started to feel as though there were no second shoe, and it had all been a crazy interlude. I thought I understood risk. I considered my time abroad with Nora as a crash course on the realities of the world, how ugly things can get, and how important it is to stay true to yourself even in the midst of an adventure or experiment. In my travels, I had encountered all kinds of people whose dignity seemed to have a price, widely variable, and I thought that next time I had better set my price higher than anyone would pay. With all that worldly wisdom secreted in my memory, I was feeling pretty damned lucky. Great job, great friends, great city, great social life. Through mutual friends, I met Larry, the only pal I knew who worked as much as I did in leisure-loving San Francisco. He ran a wire service called Alternet at a non-profit media institute. When I would crawl exhausted out of the editing room after hours, I could always count on Larry for late dinner or later drinks. In fact, Larry was always up for anything. Random tickets to a random music festival, Larry was in. Want to get up early on Sunday and go to church at Glide in the Tenderloin, and then go on a 6-hour urban hike with pit stops for Bloody Marys? He was Jewish, but sure, he'd come to church and lip-sync the hymns. He wasn't my only straight male friend, but we shared a particularly simpatico sense of humor, and he quickly became the most reliable source of fun that I knew. As Larry's new best lesbian buddy, I got to hear about his every romantic conquest and reversal in gory detail, which was both appalling and entertaining. I spared him nothing in my evaluations of his progress. He returned the favor by treating me like a queen. One evening, a bike messenger arrived at my office with a parcel that yielded a real Philadelphia soft pretzel, complete with spicy mustard, which Larry had personally imported just for me from a trip back east. How sweet, I thought, chewing. But then a disturbing thing happened. Larry got hung up on one of his attempted conquests, and a rather drippy one at that. He became distinctly less fun. I was not the only one who noticed this. "She's leading him around by his nose," other friends smirked. We mocked him mercilessly, but that didn't seem to have much effect. So I had to take matters into my own hands, and in a dark corner of a dirty nightclub, I sacrificed myself for Larry's dignity, kissing him squarely on his surprised, wise-cracking mouth. That got his attention. And mine. What the hell was I thinking? I proceeded to pretend for several months that nothing had happened, while I tried to sort out my feelings. Larry was nothing like any guy I'd ever been involved with in the past. For one thing, I liked him. For another, he was a short, scrappy, eager-to-please guy with big blue eyes, a big grin, and exceedingly big hair. I had deigned to sleep only with tall, exotically handsome narcissists in the past. I didn't particularly want to date a man, and this man wasn't even my type. Except that he was. Larry was completely my type. Even after the weirdness of our barroom kiss, we were still inseparable, although he was understandably confused, but he didn't push. He didn't demand answers or clarity. He just waited. When I remembered that pretzel, I realized that Larry had been in love with me back then, and I was in love with him. Within months, we were a real official couple, much to the shock of our skeptical friends. In fact, it was the easiest relationship I had ever been in by far. Being with him made me undeniably happy. So, when Larry came to me, conflicted and confused, to tell me that he had been offered a great magazine job back east, it didn't really disturb my equilibrium. My next step seemed so obvious, so natural, that the decision practically made itself. I quit my beloved job to move back east with him. By far the best risk I have ever taken. Larry and I landed in New York in 1998. He was an editor at a men's magazine. I worked as a freelance producer, and settled in a West Village walk-up. One warm May afternoon, the doorbell rang. I was working at home, still in my pajamas. "Who is it?" I asked over the intercom. "Miss Kerman, it's Officers Maloney and Wong." "Yes?" I wondered what the local cops wanted in the building. "Can we speak with you a moment?" "What is this about?" I was suddenly suspicious. "Miss Kerman, I think it would be better if we spoke face to face." Maloney and Wong, large men dressed in street clothes, walked up 5 flights of stairs and sat themselves down in the living room. Maloney did all the talking while Wong looked at me impassively. "Miss Kerman, we are U.S. Customs officers. We are here to notify you that you've been indicted in federal court in Chicago on charges of drug smuggling and money laundering." He handed me a sheet of paper. "You need to appear in court on that date at that place. If you do not appear, you will be taken into custody." I blinked at him silently, and the veins in my temples suddenly pounded as if I had run miles at top speed. The noise in my head scared me. I had put my past behind me, had kept it secret from just about everyone, even Larry. But that was over. I was shocked at how physical my fear was. Maloney took out a pad and paper and conversationally asked, "Would you like to make a statement, Miss Kerman?" "I think I'd better speak with a lawyer. Don't you, Officer Maloney?" I staggered uptown to Larry's office, barely remembering to change out of my pajamas. Babbling, I pulled him out onto West 22nd Street. "What's wrong? Are you mad at me?" he asked. I drew a deep breath because I couldn't talk otherwise. "I've been indicted in federal court for money laundering and drug trafficking." "What?" He was amused. He looked around, as if perhaps we were participating in some secret street theater. "It's true. I'm not making it up. I just came from the house. The feds were there. I need to use a phone. I need a lawyer. Can I use a phone?" Wait, maybe I couldn't use the phone. Maybe all the phones remotely associated with me, including all of Larry's office phones, were tapped. Every crazy, paranoid thing that Nora had ever told me was screaming for attention inside my head. Larry was looking at me as if I had lost my mind. "I need to use someone else's cell phone. Whose phone can I use?" Minutes later, I was on the fire escape outside Larry's office, using Larry's coworker's phone to call a friend in San Francisco who was the biggest big-shot lawyer I knew. He got on the line. "Wallace, it's Piper. 2 federal agents just came to my door and told me that I've been indicted for money laundering and drug trafficking." Wallace laughed. This was the reaction I would eventually get used to when friends first learned of my predicament. "Wallace, I'm totally fucking serious. I have no idea what to do. I'm freaking out. You have to help me."
"Where are you calling me from?"
"The fire escape."
"Go find a payphone."
I walked back into Larry's office. "I need to find a payphone."
"Honey, what the hell is going on?" he said.
He looked exasperated, worried, and a little annoyed. "I really don't know. I gotta go make this call. I'll come back and find you." Later, when he heard a condensed and probably less than coherent explanation of the situation, Larry was uncharacteristically quiet. He didn't yell at me for not telling him I was a former criminal before we combined our lives. He didn't chastise me for being a reckless, thoughtless, selfish idiot. As I emptied my savings account for lawyers' fees and bond money, he didn't suggest that perhaps I had ruined my life and his too. He said,
"We'll figure it out."
He said,
"It will all work out, because I love you."
That day was the beginning of a long, torturous expedition through the labyrinth of the U.S. criminal justice system. Wallace helped me find a lawyer. Confronted with the end of my life as I knew it, I adopted my standard pose when in over my head and scared. I closed myself off, telling myself that I had gotten into this mess and it was no one's fault but my own. I would have to figure out a solution on my own. But I wasn't in this alone. My family and my unsuspecting boyfriend came along for the miserable ride. Larry, my parents, my brother, my grandparents, they all stood by me the entire way, though they were appalled and ashamed by my heretofore hidden criminal past. My father came to New York, and we spent an excruciating 4 hours driving up to New England, where my grandparents were spending the summer. I wasn't feeling hip, cool, adventurous, counterculture, or rebellious. All I felt was that I had willfully hurt and disappointed everyone I loved most and carelessly thrown my life away. What I had done was beyond their comprehension, and I sat in my grandparents' living room rigid with shame at the emergency family meeting, while they questioned me for hours, trying to make some sort of sense of what was happening.
"What on earth did you do with the money?"
My grandmother asked me finally, mystified. "Well, Grandmother, I wasn't really in it for money," I answered lamely.
"Oh, Piper, for heaven's sake!" she snapped.
Not only was I a shame and a disappointment, I was an idiot, too. She didn't say I was an idiot. No one actually said I was a shame or a disappointment either. They didn't have to. I knew it. Incredibly, my mother, my father, and my grandparents, all my family, said they loved me. They were worried for me. They would help me. When I left, my grandmother hugged me hard, her tiny arms circling my rib cage. Although my family and the few friends I told took my situation seriously, they doubted that a nice blonde lady like me could ever end up in prison. But my lawyer quickly impressed upon me the severity of my situation. My indictment in federal court for criminal conspiracy had been triggered by the collapse of my ex-lover's drug smuggling operation. Nora, Jack, and 13 others, some of whom I knew and some I did not, including African drug lord Alaji, shared my indictment. Nora and Jack were both in custody, and someone was pointing fingers and naming names. No matter how badly things had ended between us, I never dreamed that Nora would turn me in to try to save her own skin. But when my lawyer sent me the prosecutor's discovery materials, the evidence the government had gathered against me, it included a detailed statement from her that described me carrying cash to Europe. I was in a whole new world, one where conspiracy charges and mandatory minimum sentencing would determine my fate. I learned that a conspiracy charge, rather than identifying individual lawless acts, accuses a group of people of plotting to commit a crime. Conspiracy charges are often brought against a person just on the strength of testimony from a co-conspirator, or, even worse, a confidential informant, someone who has agreed to rat out others in exchange for immunity. Conspiracy charges are beloved by prosecutors because they make it much easier to obtain indictments from grand juries and are a great lever for getting people to plead guilty. Once one person on a conspiracy indictment rolls over, it's pretty easy to convince their co-defendants that they won't stand a chance in open trial. Under a conspiracy charge, I would be sentenced based on the total amount of drugs involved in the operation, not on my small role in it. In the United States, mandatory minimum sentencing was a critical part of the late 20th century war on drugs. Guidelines established by Congress in the 1980s required federal judges to impose set sentences for drug crimes, regardless of the specific circumstances of a case, and without discretion to evaluate the person being sentenced. The federal laws have been widely duplicated by state legislatures. The length of the sentences completely freaked me out. 10, 12, 20 years. Mandatory minimum sentences for drug offenses are the primary reason that the U.S. prison population has ballooned since the 1980s to over 2.5 million people, a nearly 300% increase. We now lock up 1 out of every 100 adults, far more than any other country in the world. Gently but firmly, my lawyer explained to me that if I wished to go on trial and fight the conspiracy charge, I would be one of the best defendants he had ever worked with, sympathetic and with a story to tell. But if I lost, I risked the maximum sentence, probably over a decade in prison. If I pleaded guilty, make no mistake, I was going to prison, but for a much shorter time. I chose the latter. There were some agonizing conversations with Larry and with my still reeling family, but it was my decision to make. My lawyer negotiated hard and smartly on my behalf, and ultimately the U.S. Attorney's Office allowed me to plead guilty to money laundering rather than conspiracy, for which they would require a minimum sentence of 30 months in federal prison. On Halloween Day, 1998, Larry and I traveled to Chicago in costume as teenagers. Maybe my misery was masked by the disguise. That night, we hit the town with our friends Gab and Ed, who had no clue about my predicament and thought I was in Chicago for work. The next morning, I was standing tall, if pale, in my best suit, as we went to the federal building where the court was located. With Larry looking on, I choked out 3 words that sealed my fate. Guilty, Your Honor. Shortly after I pleaded guilty, something surprising happened. Alaji, the West African drug kingpin, was arrested in London on a U.S. warrant. Suddenly, my date with prison was postponed, indefinitely, while the United States tried to extradite him to stand trial. They wanted me in street clothes, not an orange jumpsuit, to testify against him. There was no end in sight. I spent almost 6 years under supervision by the feds, reporting monthly to my pretrial supervisor, an earnest young woman with an exuberantly curly mullet, and an office in the federal court building down on Pearl Street in Manhattan. Once a month, I would go through building security, ride the elevator up to pretrial services, and sign in, waiting in a dingy room decorated with inspirational and cautionary posters that reminded me about perseverance and to use condoms. I was often alone in the waiting room. Sometimes I was joined by young black or Latino men, who either sized me up silently or stared straight ahead. The occasional thick-necked older white guy with lots of gold jewelry would appear, and he would look at me with frank surprise. Once in a while there would be another female, never white, sometimes accompanied by children. They always ignored me. When my Miss Finnegan would finally appear and beckon, I would trail her to her office, where we would sit awkwardly for a few minutes. "So, any news on your case?" "Nope." "Well, this sure is a long one." Every now and then she would apologetically drug test me. I always tested clean. Eventually, Miss Finnegan left the department to go to law school, and I was transferred to the equally mild-mannered Miss Sanchez. She had long Frito chip fingernails painted Barbie pink. "You're my easiest one," she would say every month, cheerfully. Over more than 5 years of waiting, I thought about prison in every imaginable way. My predicament remained a secret from almost everyone I knew. Initially, it was too terrible, too overwhelming, and too uncertain to tell anyone what was happening. When the extradition delay struck, the situation grew too weird to broach with friends who didn't know. I'm going to prison someday. I felt that I just had to gut it out in silence. My friends who did know were mercifully quiet on the subject as the years dragged on, as if God had put me on hold. I worked hard at forgetting what loomed ahead, pouring my energies into working as a creative director for web companies and exploring downtown New York with Larry and our friends. I needed money to pay my huge ongoing legal fees, so I worked with the clients my hipster colleagues found unsexy and unpalatable. Big telecom, big petrochemicals, and big shadowy holding companies. With everyone but Larry, in my interactions I was partially absent. Only to him could I reveal my fear and shame. With folks who knew nothing of my criminal secret and looming imprisonment, I was simply not quite myself. Pleasant, sometimes charming, but aloof, distant, perhaps even indifferent. Even with close friends who knew what was happening, I wasn't fully engaged. I was always observing myself with an unstated foresight, a sense that whatever was happening now didn't matter much given what was to come. Somewhere on the horizon was coming devastation, the arrival of Cossacks and hostile Indians. As the years passed, my family almost began to believe that I would be miraculously spared. My mother was certainly logging a lot of hours in church. But never for a minute did I allow myself to indulge in that fantasy. I knew that I would go to prison. There were times when I was pretty damn depressed. But the revelation was that my family and Larry still loved me despite my massive fuck-up, that my friends who knew my situation never turned away from me, and that I could still function in the world professionally and socially, despite having ostensibly ruined my life. I began to grow less fearful about my future, my prospects for happiness, and even about prison, as more and more time passed. The main reason was Larry. When I was indicted, we were definitely in love, but just 28 and freshly arrived in New York, we were not thinking about the future beyond where we would move when the guy we were subletting from reappeared from London. When my criminal past reappeared, who could have blamed him if he had sat me down and said, "I did not sign up for this crazy shit. I thought you were good crazy, not scary crazy." Who could predict how a nice Jewish boy from New Jersey would process the information that his ex-lesbian boho wasp girlfriend was also a soon-to-be convicted felon? Who knew that my extroverted, mercurial, over-caffeinated boyfriend would be so patient, so capable, and so resourceful? That when I cried myself into hyperventilation, he would hold my head and comfort me? That he would guard my secret and make it his own? That when I moped for too long, letting the poor me blues clamp around my ankles and drag me down to very bad places, he would fight to get me back, even if it meant terrible battles and tough days and nights at home. In July 2003, we were in Massachusetts at my family's beach shack. On a beautifully sunny day, Larry and I kayaked out to Pea Island, a speck of rock and sand set in a small cove off Buzzards Bay. The island was placid and deserted. We swam and then sat on a rock looking back at the cove. Larry was fumbling with his swimming trunks, and I eyed him sideways, wondering why he was being so weird. He withdrew a plastic baggie from his swim trunks, and from it a metal box. "P, I got you these rings because I love you, and I want you to have them because you mean so much to me. There's 7 of them, for every year we've been together. We don't have to get married if you don't want to, but I want you to have them." Of course, I can't remember another word he said because I was so surprised and astonished and touched and thrilled that I couldn't hear anything more. I just shouted, "Yes!" The box held 7 hammered gold rings, each as thin as manila paper, to be worn stacked. And he had gotten himself a ring, too, a thin silver band that he worried nervously on his finger. My family was ecstatic. Larry's parents were, too, but despite the length of my relationship with their son, there was a lot they didn't know about their future daughter-in-law. They had always been kind and welcoming to me, but I was terrified of what their reaction would be to my nasty secret. Carol and Lou were different from my former hippie parents. They were 1950s high school sweethearts who predated the counterculture. They still lived in the bucolic county where they grew up, and they went to football games and bar association dinners. I didn't think they were going to understand my adolescent fascination with the underbelly of society, my involvement in international drug trafficking, or my impending incarceration. By now, more than 5 years had passed since I had been indicted. Larry thought it was important to tell his parents what was happening. We decided to practice on some other people, a tactic Larry described as tell the truth and run. Reactions were pretty consistent. Our friends would laugh uproariously, then have to be persuaded of the truth, then be horrified and worried for me. Despite our friends' responses, I was deeply frightened that my luck would run out with my future in-laws. Larry called his parents and told them there was something important we needed to discuss with them in person. We drove down on an August evening, arrived late, and ate a classic summer dinner: steak, corn on the cob, big juicy Jersey tomatoes, delicious peach cobbler. Larry and I sat opposite each other at their kitchen table. Carol and Lou looked far more than nervous, but not quite terrified. I think they assumed it was about me and not about Larry. Finally, Larry said, "Bad news, but it's not cancer." The story spilled out of me, with interruptions from Larry, not entirely coherent, but at least it was out, like a splinter. Carol was sitting next to me, and she took my hand, squeezed it hard, and said, "You were young." Lou tried to organize this radical new information in his head by switching into lawyer mode, asking about my indictment, my lawyer, the court in question, and what he could do to help. And was I a heroin addict? The beautiful irony of Larry's family was that when something minor was amiss, it was as if the Titanic were going down. But when a real disaster struck, they were the people you wanted in your life raft. I had expected an explosion of recrimination and rejection, and instead got a big hug. Ultimately, Britain declined to extradite the kingpin Alaji to America, and instead set him free. My lawyer explained that as a Nigerian, he was a citizen of the British Commonwealth and enjoyed certain protections under British law. A little bit of web research revealed that he was a wealthy and powerful businessman gangster in Africa, and I could certainly imagine that he might have connections that could make pesky things like extradition treaties go away. Finally, the U.S. Attorney in Chicago was willing to move forward with my case. To prepare for my sentencing, I wrote a personal statement to the court and broke my silence with more friends and co-workers, asking them to write letters vouching for my character and asking the judge for leniency. It was an incredibly humbling and difficult experience to approach people I had known for years, confess my situation, and ask for their help. Their collective response was devastating. I had steeled myself for rejection, knowing it would be perfectly reasonable for someone to decline on any number of grounds. Instead, I was overwhelmed by kindness and concern, and cried over every letter, whether it described my childhood, my friendships, or my work ethic. Each person strived to convey what they thought was important and great about me, which flew in the face of how I felt, profoundly unworthy. One of my dearest friends from college, Kate, wrote this to the judge. I believe that her decision to enter into criminal activity was partially motivated by a sense that she was alone in the world and had to look out for herself. Since the time that she made those decisions, her relationships with others have changed and deepened. I believe that she now knows that her life is entwined with those of people who love her. Finally, my sentencing date drew near. While the cliché, "what doesn't kill you makes you stronger," had been echoing in my brain over the almost 6 years of waiting, I had to consider the truth it offers, like most hoary, often repeated ideas. I had dealt myself the cards of deceit, exposure, shame, near bankruptcy, and self-imposed isolation. It was a pretty crappy hand to try to play. And yet, somehow, I was not alone at this stage of the game. My family, my friends, my co-workers, these good people had all refused to abandon me despite my rotten, wild, reckless behavior all those years ago, and my I-am-an-island fortress method of dealing with my problems. Maybe, because all these good people loved me enough to help me, I wasn't quite as bad as I felt. Maybe there was a part of me that was worthy of their love. Larry and I again flew to Chicago, and I met with my lawyer, Pat Cotter, the day before my sentencing. We hoped for a shorter sentence than 30 months, and with Pat's careful, painstaking, and persuasive legal work, the U.S. Attorney had agreed not to oppose our motion in light of the lengthy delay. I showed Pat my options for courtroom wardrobe, one of my sleek creative director pantsuits, a militaristic navy coat dress that had to be the most conservative piece of clothing I owned, and a bonus choice, a skirt suit from the 1950s that I had won on eBay, soft cream with a delicate blue window pane check. Very country club. "That's the one," said Pat, motioning at the skirt suit. "We want him to be reminded of his own daughter or niece or neighbor when he looks at you." I couldn't sleep that night, and Larry flicked on the hotel television to a yoga channel, where a smooth, handsome yogi struck pretzel poses on a hypnotic Hawaiian beach. I wished fervently that I were there instead. On December 8th, 2003, I stood in front of Judge Charles Norgal with a small group of my family and friends sitting behind me in the courtroom. Before he handed down my sentence, I made my statement to the court. "Your Honor, more than a decade ago, I made bad decisions on both a practical and a moral level. I acted selfishly, without regard for others. I knowingly broke the law, I lied to my loving family, and I distanced myself from my true friends. I am prepared to face the consequences of my actions and accept whatever punishment the court decides upon. I am truly sorry for all the harm I have caused to others, and I know the court will deal fairly with me. I would like to take this opportunity to thank my parents, my fiancé, and my friends and colleagues who are here today and who have loved and supported me, and to apologize to them for all the pain, worry, and embarrassment I have caused them. Your Honor, thank you for hearing my statement and considering my case." I was sentenced to 15 months in federal prison, and I could hear Larry, my parents, and my friend Kristen crying behind me. I thought it was a miracle it wasn't a longer sentence, and I was so exhausted by waiting that I was eager to get it over with as quickly as possible. Still, my parents' suffering was worse than any strain, fatigue, or depression that the long legal delay caused me. But the wait continued, this time for my prison assignment. It felt a lot like waiting for my college acceptance letter. I hope I get into Danbury in Connecticut. Anywhere else would have proved disastrous in respect to seeing Larry or my family with any frequency. West Virginia, 500 miles away, had the next closest federal women's prison. When the thin envelope arrived from the federal marshals telling me to report to the Federal Correctional Institution, FCI, in Danbury, on February 4th, 2004, my relief was overwhelming. I tried to get my affairs in order, preparing to vanish for over a year. I had already read the books on Amazon about surviving prison, but they were written for men. I paid a visit to my grandparents, nervously fighting off the fear that I might not see them again. About a week before I was to report, Larry and I met a small group of friends at Joe's Bar on 6th Street in the East Village for an impromptu going away. These were our good friends from the city, who had known my secret and done whatever they could to help. We had a good time, shot pool, told stories, drank tequila. The night went on. I wasn't slowing down. I wasn't going to exercise any tequila restraint. I wasn't going to be a bummer. Night turned into morning, and finally someone had to go home. And as I hugged them as hard and relentlessly as only a girl drunk on tequila can, it sank in on me that this was really goodbye. I didn't know when I would see any of my friends again, or what I would be like when I did. And I started to cry. I never wept in front of anyone but Larry, but now I cried, and then my friends started to cry. We must have looked like lunatics, a dozen people sitting in an East Village bar at 3 a.m, sobbing. I couldn't stop. I cried and cried as I said goodbye to every one of them. It took forever. I would calm down for a minute and then turn to another friend and start to sob again. Completely beyond embarrassment, I was so sad. The next afternoon I could barely see myself between the puffy slits that were my eyes. I had never looked worse, but I felt a little better. My lawyer, Pat Cotter, had sent his share of white-collar clients off to prison. He advised me, "Piper, I think for you the hardest thing about prison will be chicken shit rules enforced by chicken shit people. Call me if you run into trouble. And don't make any friends." Chapter 3. Number 11187-424. On February 4th, 2004, more than a decade after I had committed my crime, Larry drove me to the women's prison in Danbury, Connecticut. We had spent the previous night at home. Larry had cooked me an elaborate dinner, and then we curled up in a ball on our bed, crying. Now we were heading much too quickly through a drab February morning toward the unknown. As we made a right onto the federal reservation and up a hill to the parking lot, a hulking building with a vicious-looking triple-layer razor wire fence loomed up. If that was minimum security, I was fucked. Larry pulled into one of the parking areas. We looked at each other, saucer-eyed. Almost immediately, a white pickup with police lights on its roof pulled in after us. I rolled down my window. "There's no visiting today," the officer told me. I stuck my chin out, defiance covering my fear. "I'm here to surrender." "Oh, all right then." He pulled out and drove away. Had he looked surprised? I wasn't sure. In the car, I stripped off all my jewelry, the 7 gold rings, the diamond earrings Larry had given me for Christmas, the sapphire ring from my grandmother, the 1950s man's watch that was always around my wrist, all the earrings from all the extra holes that had so vexed my grandfather. I had on jeans, sneakers, and a long-sleeved t-shirt. With false bravado, I said, "Let's do this." We walked into the lobby. A placid woman in uniform was sitting behind the raised desk. There were chairs, some lockers, a payphone, and a soda machine. It was spotless. "I'm here to surrender," I announced. "Hold on." She picked up a phone and spoke to someone briefly. "Have a seat." We sat. For several hours. It got to be lunchtime. Larry handed me a foie gras sandwich that he had made from last night's leftovers. I wasn't hungry at all, but unwrapped it from the tinfoil and munched every gourmet bite miserably. I am fairly certain that I was the first Seven Sisters grad to eat duck liver chased with a Diet Coke in the lobby of a federal penitentiary. Then again, you never know. Finally, a considerably less pleasant-looking woman entered the lobby. She had a dreadful scar down the side of her face and neck. "Kerman?" she barked. We sprang to our feet. "Yes, that's me." "Who's this?" she said. "This is my fiancé." "Well, he's got to leave before I take you in." Larry looked outraged. "That's the rule. It prevents problems. You have any personal items?" I had a manila envelope in my hands, which I handed to her. It contained my self-surrender instructions from the U.S. Marshals, some of my legal paperwork, 25 photographs, an embarrassing number of my cats, lists of my friends' and family's addresses, and a cashier's check for $290 that I had been instructed to bring. I knew I would need money in my prison account to make phone calls and buy something. I couldn't imagine what. "Can't take that," she said, handing the check to Larry. "But I called last week and they told me to bring it." "He has to send it to Georgia, then they'll process it," she said with absolute finality. "Where do we send it?" I asked. I was suddenly furious. "Hey, do you have that Georgia address?" the prison guard asked over her shoulder to the woman at the desk while poking through my envelope. "What are these, pictures? You got any nudie-judies in here?" She raised an eyebrow in her already crooked face. Nudie-judies? Was she for real? She looked at me as if to ask, "Do I need to go through all these photos to see if you're a dirty girl?" "No nudie-judies," I said. 3 minutes into my self-surrender, and I already felt humiliated and beaten. Okay. Are you ready? I nodded. Well, say goodbye. Since you're not married, it could be a while until he can visit. She took a symbolic step away from us, I guess to give us privacy. I looked at Larry and hurled myself into his arms, holding on tight as I could. I had no idea when I would see him again, or what would happen to me in the next 15 months. He looked as if he was going to cry, yet at the same time he was also furious. "I love you. I love you," I said into his neck in his nice oatmeal sweater that I had picked for him. He squeezed me and told me he loved me too. "I'll call you as soon as I can," I croaked. "Okay." "Please call my parents." "Okay." "Send that check immediately." "I know." "I love you." And then he left the lobby, rubbing his eyes with the heel of his hand. He banged the doors hard and walked quickly to the parking lot. The prison guard and I watched him get into the car. As soon as he was out of sight, I felt a surge of fear. She turned to me. "You ready?" I was alone with her and whatever else was waiting for me. "Yeah." "Well, come on." She led me out the door Larry had just exited from, turning right and walking along that vicious towering fence. The fence had multiple layers. Between each layer was a gate through which we had to be buzzed. She opened the gate and I stepped in. I looked back over my shoulder at the free world. The next gate buzzed. I stepped through again, wire mesh and barbed metal soaring all around me. I felt fresh rising panic. This was not what I had expected. This was not how minimum security camps had been described. This didn't look at all like Club Fed. This was scaring the crap out of me. We reached the door of the building and again were buzzed in. We walked through a small hallway into an institutional tiled room with harsh fluorescent light. It felt old, dingy, clinical, and completely empty. She pointed into a holding cell with benches bolted to the walls and metal screens over all visible sharp edges. "Wait in there." Then she walked through a door into another room. I sat on a bench facing away from the door. I stared at the small high window through which I could see nothing but clouds. I wondered when I would see anything beautiful again. I meditated on the consequences of my long-ago actions and seriously questioned why I was not on the lam in Mexico. I kicked my feet. I thought about my 15-month sentence, which did nothing to quell my panic. I tried not to think about Larry. Then I gave up and tried to imagine what he was doing, with no success. I had only the most tenuous idea of what might happen next, but I knew that I would have to be brave. Not foolhardy, not in love with risk and danger, not making ridiculous exhibitions of myself to prove that I wasn't terrified. Really, genuinely brave. Brave enough to be quiet when quiet was called for. Brave enough to observe before flinging myself into something. Brave enough to not abandon my true self when someone else wanted to seduce or force me in a direction I didn't want to go. Brave enough to stand my ground quietly. I waited an unquantifiable amount of time while trying to be brave. "Kerman?" As I was unaccustomed to being called like a dog, it took her a number of shouts before I realized that meant move. I jumped up and peered cautiously out of the holding cell. "Come on." The prison guard's rasp made it hard for me to understand what she was saying. She led me into the next room, where her co-workers were lounging. Both were bald, male, and white. One of them was startlingly big, approaching 7 feet tall. The other was very short. They both stared at me as if I had 3 heads. "Self-surrender," my female escort said to them by way of explanation as she started my paperwork. She spoke to me like I was an idiot, yet explained nothing during the process. Every time I was slow to answer or asked her to repeat a question, Shorty would snort derisively, or worse, mimic my responses. I looked at him in disbelief. It was unnerving, as it was clearly intended to be, and it pissed me off, which was a welcome switch from the fear I was battling. The female guard continued to bark questions and fill out forms. As I stood at attention and answered, I could not stop my eyes from turning toward the window, to the natural light outdoors. "Come on." I followed the guard toward the hallway outside the holding cell. She pawed through a shelf filled with clothing, then handed me a pair of granny panties, a cheap nylon bullet bra, a pair of elastic waist khaki pants, a khaki top, like hospital scrubs, and tube socks. "What size shoe are you?" 9.5. She handed me a little pair of blue canvas slippers like you would buy on the street in any Chinatown. She indicated a toilet and sink area behind a plastic shower curtain. "Strip." I kicked off my sneakers, took off my socks, my jeans, my t-shirt, my bra, and my underpants, all of which she took from me. It was cold. "Hold your arms up." I did, displaying my armpits. "Open your mouth and stick out your tongue. Turn around, squat, spread your cheeks, and cough." I would never get used to the cough part of this drill, which was supposed to reveal contraband hidden in one's privates. It was just so unnatural. I turned back around, naked. "Get dressed." She put my own clothes in a box. They would be mailed back to Larry, like the personal effects of a dead soldier. The bullet bra, though hideous and scratchy, did fit. So, in fact, did all of the khaki prison clothes, much to my amazement. She really had the eye. In minutes, I was transformed into an inmate. Now she seemed to soften toward me a bit. As she was fingerprinting me, a messy and oddly intimate process, she asked, "How long you been with that guy?" 7 years, I replied sullenly. "You know what you were up to?" Up to? What did she know? My temper flared again as I said defiantly, "It's a 10-year-old offense. He had nothing to do with it." She seemed surprised by this, which I took as a moral victory. "Well, you're not married, so you probably won't be seeing him for quite a while. Not until he gets on your visitor list." The horrifying reality that I had no idea when I would see Larry again shut me right down. The prison guard was indifferent to the devastating blow she had just dealt me. She had been distracted by the fact that no one seemed to know how to use the ID machine camera. Everyone took a turn poking at it, until finally they produced a photo that made me look remarkably like serial killer Eileen Wuornos. My chin was raised defiantly, and I looked like hell. I later figured out that everyone looks either thuggish or murderous or terrified and miserable in their prison ID photo. I'm proud to say that against all odds, I fell into the former category, though I felt like the latter. The ID card was red, with a barcode and the legend, U.S. Department of Justice Federal Bureau of Prisons, Inmate. In addition to the unflattering photo, it also bore my new registration number in large numerals, 11187-424. The last 3 numbers indicated my sentencing district, Northern Illinois. The first 5 numbers were unique to me, my new identity. Just as I had been taught to memorize my aunt and uncle's phone number when I was 6 years old, I now silently tried to commit my reg number to memory. 11187-424, 11187-424, 11187-424, 11187-424, 11187-424, 11187-424, 11187-424, 11187-424, 11187-424, 11187-424. After the ID debacle, Ms. Personality said, "Mr. Butorski's going to talk to you, but first go into medical." She pointed into another small room. "Mr. who?" I went and stared out the window, obsessing about the razor wire and the world beyond it from which I had been taken, until a medic, a round Filipino man, came to see me. He performed the most basic of medical interviews, which went quickly, as I have been blessed with more or less perfect health. He told me he needed to perform a TB test, for which I extended my arm. "Nice veins," he said with very genuine admiration. "No track marks." Given his total lack of irony, I thanked him. Mr. Butorsky was a compact, mustachioed 50-ish man with watery, blinky blue eyes and, unlike the prison staff I had met so far, of discernible intelligence. He was leaning back in a chair, with paperwork spread out in front of him. It was my PSI, the pre-sentencing investigation that the feds do on people like me. It's supposed to document the basic facts of one's crime, one's prior offenses, one's family situation and children, one's history of substance abuse, work history, everything important. "Kerman, sit down." He gestured, looking at me in a way that I suspect was much practiced to be calculating, penetrating, and measuring. I sat. He regarded me for several seconds in silence. I kept my chin firm and didn't look at him. "How are you doing?" he asked. It was startling to have anyone show the slightest interest in how exactly I was doing. I felt a flood of gratitude in spite of myself. "I'm okay." "You are?" I nodded, deciding this was a good situation for my tough act. He looked out the window. "In a little bit, I'm going to have them take you up to the camp," he began. My brain relaxed a bit and my stomach unclenched. I followed his gaze out the window, feeling profound relief that I wouldn't have to stay down here with evil Shorty. "I'll be your counselor at the camp. You know, I've been reading your file." He gestured at my PSI on the desk. "Sort of unusual. Pretty big case." Was it? I realized I had absolutely no idea if it was a big case or not. If I was a big-time criminal, who exactly would my cellmates be? "And it's been a long time since you were involved in all that," he continued. "That's pretty unusual. I can tell you've matured since then." He looked at me. "Yeah, I guess so," I muttered. "Well, look, I've been working up at that camp for 10 years. I run that camp. It's my camp, and there's nothing that goes on up there that I don't know about." I was embarrassed by how relieved I felt. I didn't want to see this man or any prison staffer as my protector, but at the moment he was the closest thing to human I had encountered. "We've got all types up there. What you really have to watch is the other inmates. Some of them are all right. No one's going to mess with you unless you let them. Now, women, they don't fight much. They talk, they gossip, they spread rumors, so they may talk about you. Some of these girls are going to think you think you're better than them. They're going to say, 'Oh, she's got money.'" I felt uncomfortable. Was that how I came across? Was I going to be pegged as a snotty rich bitch? "And there's lesbians up there. They're there, but they're not going to bother you. Some are going to try and be your friend, whatever. Just stay away from them. I want you to understand, you do not have to have lesbian sex. I'm old-fashioned. I don't approve of any of that mess." I tried very hard not to smirk. Guess he didn't read my file that closely. "Mr. Butorsky?" "Yes?" "I'm wondering when my fiancé and my mother can come to visit me?" I could not control the querulous tone in my voice. "They're both in your PSI, right?" My PSI detailed all the members of my immediate family, including Larry, who had been interviewed by the probation department. "Yes, they're all in there. And my father, too." "Anyone who's in your PSI is cleared to visit. They can come this weekend. I'll make sure the list is in the visiting room." He stood up. "You just keep to yourself. You're going to be fine." He gathered up my paperwork and left. I went out to retrieve my new creature comforts from the prison guard. 2 sheets, a pillowcase, 2 cotton blankets, a couple of cheap white towels, and a face cloth. These items were crammed into a mesh laundry bag. Add to that an ugly brown stadium coat with a broken zipper and a sandwich bag that contained a stubby mini toothbrush, tiny packets of toothpaste and shampoo, and a rectangle of motel soap. Heading out through the multiple gates of the monster fence, I felt elated that I would not be behind it. But now the mystery of the camp was rushing toward me, unstoppable. A white minivan waited. Its driver, a middle-aged woman in army-issue-looking street clothes and sunglasses, greeted me warmly. She wore makeup and little gold hoops in her ears, and she looked like she could be a nice Italian-American lady called Roe from New Jersey. The prison guards are getting friendlier, I thought as I climbed into the passenger seat. She closed the door and smiled encouragingly at me. She was chipper. I stared back at her. She flipped up the sunglasses. "I'm Minetta. I'm an inmate, too." "Oh!" I was flabbergasted that she was a prisoner, and she was driving, and wearing makeup. "What's your name? Your last name? People go by their last names here." "Kerman," I replied. "Is this your first time down?" "My first time here?" I was confused. "Your first time in prison." I nodded. "You doing okay, Kerman?" she asked as she guided the minivan up a small hill. "It's not so bad. You're going to be all right. We'll take care of you. Everyone's okay here, though you've got to watch out for the stealing. How much time do you have?" "How much time?" I bleated. "How long is your sentence?" "Oh, 15 months. "That's not bad. That'll be over in no time." We circled to the back entrance of a long, low building that resembled a 1970s elementary school. She pulled up next to a handicapped ramp and stopped the car. Clutching my laundry bag, I followed her toward the building, picking through patches of ice while the cold penetrated my thin rubber soles. Small knots of women wearing identical ugly brown coats were smoking in the February chill. They looked tough and depressed, and they all had on big, heavy black shoes. I noticed that one of them was hugely pregnant. What was a woman that pregnant doing in prison? "Do you smoke?" Minetta asked. "No." "Good for you. We'll just get you your bed assignment and get you settled. There's the dining hall." She gestured to her left down several stairs. She was talking the entire time, explaining everything about Danbury Federal Prison Camp, none of which I was catching. I followed her up a couple of stairs and into the building. "TV room, there's the education office, that's the CO's office. Hi, Mr. Scott." CO, that's the correctional officer. He's all right. "Hey, Sally." She greeted a tall white woman. "This is Kerman. She's new. Self-surrender." Sally greeted me sympathetically with another, "Are you okay?" I nodded, mute. Minetta pressed on. "Here's more offices. Those are the rooms up there, the dorms down there." She turned to me, serious. "You're not allowed down there. It's out of bounds for you. You understand?" I nodded, not understanding a thing. Women were surging all around me, black, white, Latino, every age here in my new home, and they made a tremendous collective din in the linoleum and cinder-block interior. They were all dressed in khaki uniforms different from the one I was wearing, and they all wore huge, heavy-looking black work shoes. I realized that my attire made it glaringly obvious that I was new. I looked down at my little canvas slippers and shivered in my brown coat. As we proceeded up the long main hall, several more women came up and greeted me with the standard, "You're new. Are you all right?" They seemed genuinely concerned. I hardly knew how to respond, but smiled weakly and said hello back. "Okay, here's the counselor's office. Who's your counselor?" "Mr. Butorsky." "Oh, well, at least he does his paperwork. Hold on, let me see where they put you." She knocked on the door with some authority. Opening it, she stuck her head in, all business. "Where did you put Kerman?" Butorsky gave her a response that she understood, and she led me up to room 6. We entered a room that held 3 sets of bunk beds and 6 waist-high metal lockers. 2 older women were lying on the lower bunks. "Hey, Annette, this is Kerman. She's new, a self-surrender. Annette will take care of you," she told me. "Here's your bed." She indicated the one empty top bunk with a naked mattress. Annette sat up. She was a small, dark 50-ish woman with short, spiky black hair. She looked tired. "Hi," she said in a Jersey accent. "How are you? What's your name again?" "It's Piper Kerman." Miretta's work was apparently done. I thanked her profusely, making no effort to hide my gratitude, and she exited. I was left with Annette and the other silent woman, who was tiny, bald, and seemed much older, maybe 70. I cautiously placed my laundry bag on my bunk and looked around the room. In addition to the steel bunk beds and lockers, everywhere I looked there were hangers with clothes, towels, and string bags dangling from them. It looked like a barracks. Annette got out of bed and revealed herself to be about 5 feet tall. "That's Miss Luce. I've been keeping stuff in your locker. I gotta get it out. Here's some toilet paper. You gotta take it with you." "Thank you." I was still clutching my envelope with my paperwork and photos in it, and now a roll of toilet paper. "Did they explain to you about the Count?" she asked. "The Count?" I was getting used to feeling completely idiotic. It was as if I'd been homeschooled my whole life and then dropped into a large, crowded high school. "Lunch money? What's that?" "The Count. They count us 5 times a day, and you have to be here or wherever you're supposed to be, and the 4 o'clock count is a standing count, and the other ones are at midnight, 2 a.m., 5 a.m., and 9 p.m. Did they give you your PAC number?" "PAC number?" "Yeah, you'll need it to make phone calls. Did they give you a phone sheet?" "No. You need to fill it out so you can make phone calls. Maybe Torricello will let you make a call if you ask him. It's his late night. It helps if you cry. Ask him after dinner. Dinner's after the 4 o'clock count, which is pretty soon, and lunch is at 11. Breakfast is from 6:15 to 7:15. How much time do you have?" 15 months. How much time do you have?" 57 months. If there was an appropriate response to this information, I didn't know what it was. What could this middle-class, middle-aged Italian-American lady from Jersey possibly have done to get 57 months in federal prison? Was she Carmela Soprano? 57 months. From my pre-surrender due diligence, I knew it was verboten to ask anyone about their crime. She saw that I was unsure what to say and helped me out. "Yeah, it's a lot of time," she said sort of dryly. "Yeah," I agreed. I turned to start pulling items out of my laundry bag. That's when she shrieked, "Don't make your bed!" "What?" I spun around, alarmed. "We'll make it for you," she said. "Oh, no, that's not necessary. I'll make it." I turned back to the thin cotton poly sheets I'd been issued. She came over to my bunk. "Honey, we'll make the bed." She was very firm. "We know how." I was completely mystified. I looked around the room. All 5 beds were very tidily made, and both Annette and Miss Luce had been lying on top of their covers. "I know how to make a bed," I protested tentatively. "Listen, let us make the bed. We know how to do it so it'll pass inspection." Inspection? No one told me anything about inspections. "Inspection happens whenever Butowski wants to do them, and he is insane," Annette said. "He will stand on the lockers and try to see dust on the light fixtures. He will walk on your bed. He's a nut. And that one," she pointed to the bunk below mine, "doesn't want to help clean." Uh-oh. I hated cleaning too, but was certainly not about to risk the ire of my new roommates. "So we have to make the beds every morning?" I asked, another penetrating question. Annette looked at me. "No, we sleep on top of the beds." "You don't sleep in the bed?" "No, you sleep on top with a blanket over you." Pause. "But what if I want to sleep in the bed?" Annette looked at me with the complete exasperation a mom shows a recalcitrant 6-year-old. "Look, if you want to do that, go ahead. You'll be the only one in the whole prison." This sort of social pressure was irresistible. Getting between the sheets wasn't going to happen for the next 15 months. I let go of the bed issue. The thought of hundreds of women sleeping on top of perfectly made military-style beds was too strange for me to deal with at that moment. Plus, somewhere nearby, a man was bellowing, "Count time, count time, count time, count time, ladies!" I looked at Annette, who looked nervous. "See that red light?" Out in the hallway, over the officer's station, was a giant red bulb that was now illuminated. "That light comes on during count. When that light is on, you better be where you're supposed to be, and don't move until it goes off." Women were streaming back and forth in the hallway, and 2 young Latinas came hurrying into the room. Annette did a brief round of introductions. "This is Piper." They barely glanced at me. "Where is the woman who sleeps here?" I asked about my missing bunkmate. "That one? She works in the kitchen, so they count her down there. You'll meet her." She grimaced. "Okay, shh. It's a stand-up count. No talking." The 5 of us stood silent by our bunks, waiting. The entire building was suddenly quiet. All I could hear was the jangling of keys and the thud of heavy boots. Eventually, a man stuck his head into the room and counted us. Then, several seconds later, another man came in and counted us. When he left, everyone sat down on beds and a couple of footstools, but I figured it wouldn't be cool to sit on my absent bunkmate's bed, so I leaned on my empty locker. Minutes passed. The 2 Latina women began to whisper to Miss Luce in Spanish. Suddenly we heard, "Recount, ladies!" Everyone leaped back on their feet, and I stood at attention. "They always screw it up," muttered Annette under her breath. "How hard is it to count?" We were counted again, this time with seeming success, and the payoff of inspections became apparent to me. "It's supper time," said Annette. It was 4:30 in the afternoon, by New York City standards, an unimaginably uncivilized time to eat dinner. "We're last." "What do you mean, last?" Over the PA system, the CO was calling out numbers. "A12, A10, A23, go eat. B8, B18, B22, go eat. C2, C15, C23, go eat." Annette explained. "He's calling honor cubes. They eat first. Then he calls the dorms in order of how well they did in inspection. Rooms are always last. We always do the worst in inspection." I peered out the door at the women heading to the chow hall and wondered what an honor cube was, but asked, "What's for dinner anyway?" "Liver." After the liver and lima beans dinner, served in a mess hall that brought back every dreadful school-age cafeteria memory, women of every shape, size, and complexion flooded back into the main hall of the building, shouting in English and Spanish. Everyone seemed to be lingering expectantly in the hall, sitting in groups on the stairs or lining the landing. Figuring that I was supposed to be there too, I tried to make myself invisible and listen to the words swirling around me, but I couldn't figure out what the hell was going on. Finally, I timidly asked the woman next to me. "It's mail call, honey," she answered. A very tall black woman up on the landing seemed to be handing out toiletries. Someone on my right gestured toward her. "Gloria's going home. She's down to a wake-up." I stared at Gloria with renewed interest as she tried to find someone to take a small purple comb off her hands. Going home. The idea of leaving was riveting to me. She looked so nice and so happy as she gave away all her things. I felt a tiny bit better, knowing that it was possible someday to go home from this awful place. I wanted her purple comb very badly. It looked like the combs we used to carry in the back pockets of our jeans in junior high, that we'd whip out and use to fix our winged bangs. I stared at the comb, too shy to reach up and ask. and then it was gone, claimed by another woman. A guard, different from the one Minetta had pointed out earlier, emerged from the CO's office. He looked like a gay porn star, with a bristling black crew cut and a scrub brush mustache. He started bellowing, "Mail call, mail call!" Then he started giving out the mail. "Ortiz, Williams, Kennedy, Lombardi, Ruiz, Skelton, Platty, Platty, Platty. Wait a minute, Platty, there's more. Mendoza, Rojas." Each woman would step up to claim her mail with a smile on her face and then skitter away somewhere to read it, perhaps someplace with more privacy than I had yet observed. The hall's population thinned as he worked through the bin of mail until there were only hopefuls left. "Maybe tomorrow, ladies," he shouted, turning the empty bin upside down. After mail call, I crept around the building, feeling vulnerable in my stupid little canvas slippers that so obviously marked me as new. My head was spinning with new information, and for the first moment in hours I was sort of alone with my thoughts, which turned immediately to Larry and my parents. They must be freaking. I had to figure out how to let them know that I was okay. Very timidly, I approached the closed door to the counselor's office, clutching a blue phone sheet that Annette had shown me how to fill out, bubbling in the numbers of people I wanted permission to call on the payphones at some future date. Larry's cell phone, my family, my best friend, Kristen, my lawyer. The lights in the office were on. I rapped softly, and there was a muffled snort from within. Gingerly, I turned the handle. The counselor named Torricella, who always wore a look of mild surprise, was blinking his little eyes at me, annoyed at my interruption. "Mr. Torricella, I'm Kerman. I'm new. They said I should come talk to you." I trailed off, swallowing. "Is something wrong?" "They said I should turn in my phone list, and I don't have a PAC number." "I'm not your counselor." My throat was getting very tight, and there was no need to fake tears. My eyes were threatening to spill. "Mr. Torricella, they said maybe you might let me call my fiancé and let him know that I'm okay." I was begging. He looked at me, silent. Finally, he grunted, "Come in and close the door." My heart started pounding twice as hard. He picked up the phone and handed the receiver to me. "Tell me the number and I'll dial it. Just 2 minutes." Larry's cell phone rang, and I closed my eyes and willed him to answer it. If I lost this opportunity to hear his voice, I might die right on the spot. "Hello?" "Larry. Larry, it's me." "Baby, are you okay?" I could hear how relieved he was. Now the tears were falling, and I was trying not to screw up my 2 minutes or scare Larry by totally losing it. I snuffled. "Yes, I'm okay. I'm really okay. I'm fine. I love you. Thank you for taking me today." "Honey, don't be crazy. Are you sure you're okay? You're not just saying that?" "No, I'm all right. Mr. Torricella let me call you, but I won't be able to call you again for a while. But listen, you can come visit me this weekend. You should be on a list." "Baby, I'll come on Friday." "So can Mom. Please call her and call Dad. Call them as soon as we get off the phone and tell them you talked to me and tell them I'm okay. I won't be able to call for a while. I can't make phone calls yet. And send in that money order right away." "I mailed it already." "Baby, are you sure you're okay? Is it all right? You would tell me if it wasn't." "I'm okay. There's a lady from South Jersey in my room. She's nice. She's Italian." Mr. Torricella cleared his throat. "Darling, I have to go. I only have 2 minutes. I love you so much. I miss you so much." "Baby, I love you. I'm worried about you." "Don't worry, I'm okay. I swear. I love you, darling. Please come see me and call Mom and Dad." "I'll call them as soon as we get off the phone. Can I do anything else, baby?" "I love you. I have to go, honey." "I love you too." "Come see me on Friday. And thank you for calling my folks. I love you."
I hung up the phone. Mr. Torricella watched me with something that looked like sympathy in his beady little eyes.
"It's your first time down?" he said.
After thanking him, I headed out into the hall, wiping my nose on my arm, depleted but exponentially happier. I looked down at the doors of the forbidden dorms and studiously examined the bulletin boards covered with incomprehensible information about events and rules I didn't understand, laundry schedules, inmate appointments with various staffers, crochet permits, and the weekend movie schedule. This weekend's film was Bad Boys 2. I avoided eye contact. Nevertheless, women periodically accosted me.
"You're new? How are you doing, honey? Are you okay?"
Most of them were white. This was a tribal ritual that I would see play out hundreds of times in the future. When a new person arrived, their tribe, white, black, Latino, or the few and far between others, would immediately make note of their situation, get them settled, and steer them through their arrival. If you fell into that other category, Native American, Asian, Middle Eastern, then you got a patchwork welcome committee of the kindest and most compassionate women from the dominant tribes. The other white women brought me a bar of soap, a real toothbrush and toothpaste, shampoo, some stamps and writing materials, some instant coffee, cremora, a plastic mug, and perhaps most important, shower shoes to avoid terrible foot fungi. It turned out that these were all items that one had to purchase at the prison commissary. You didn't have the money to buy toothpaste or soap? Tough. Better hope that another prisoner would give it to you. I wanted to bawl every time another lady brought me a personal care item and reassured me, "It'll be okay, Kerman." By now, conflicting things were churning around in my brain and my guts. Had I ever been so completely out of my element as I was here in Danbury? In a situation where I simply didn't know what to say or what the real consequences of a wrong move might be? The next year was looming ahead of me like Mount Doom, even as I was quickly learning that compared with most of these women's sentences, 15 months were a blip, and I had nothing to complain about. So though I knew I shouldn't complain, I was bereft. No Larry, no friends, no family to talk to keep me company, to make me laugh, to lean on. Every time a random woman with a few missing teeth gave me a bar of deodorant soap, I swung wildly from elation to despair at the loss of my life as I knew it. Had I ever been so completely at the mercy of the kindness of strangers? And yet, they were kind. The young woman who furnished my new shower shoes had introduced herself as Rose Marie. She was milky pale, with short curly brown hair and thick glasses over mischievous brown eyes. Her accent was instantly familiar to me. Educated, but with a strong whiff of working-class Massachusetts. She knew Annette, who she said was Italian, and had made a point of greeting me several times already. And now she came by room 6 to bring me reading material. I was a self-surrender, and I was terrified. "You're going to be okay," she assured me. "Are you from Massachusetts?" I asked shyly. "My Boston accent must be wicked bad. I'm from Norwood." She laughed. That accent made me feel a lot better. We started talking about the Red Sox and her stint as a volunteer on Carey's last senatorial campaign. "How long are you here for?" I asked innocently. Rose Marie got a funny look on her face. 54 months, for internet auction fraud. But I'm going to boot camp, so when you take that into account... And she launched into a calculation of good time and reduction of sentence and halfway house time. I was shocked again, both by her casual revelation of her crime and by her sentence. 54 months in federal prison for eBay fraud? Rose Marie's presence was comfortingly familiar. That accent, the love for Manny Ramirez, her Wall Street Journal subscription, all reminded me of places other than here. "Let me know if you need anything," she said, "and don't feel bad if you need a shoulder to cry on. I cried nonstop for the first week I was here." I made it through the first night in my prison bed without crying. Truth was, I didn't really feel like it anymore. I was too shocked and tired. Earlier, I had sidled my way into one of the TV rooms with my back to the wall. But the news of the Martha Stewart trial was on, and no one was paying any attention to me. Eyeing the bookshelf crammed with James Patterson, V.C. Andrews, and romance novels, I finally found an old paperback copy of Pride and Prejudice and retired to my bunk, on top of the covers, of course. I fell gratefully into the much more familiar world of Hanoverian England. My new roommates left me alone. At 10 p.m., the lights were turned off abruptly, and I slipped Jane Austen onto my locker and stared at the ceiling, listening to Annette's respirator machine. She had suffered a massive heart attack shortly after arriving in Danbury and had to use it at night to breathe. Miss Luce, almost imperceptible in the other bottom bunk, was recovering from breast cancer treatment and had no hair on her tiny head. I was beginning to suspect that the most dangerous thing you could do in prison was get sick.